Hey guys, welcome to episode 144. I've got three excellent guests joining me today. First, I've got Barry Ritholtz. We talk finance, we talk behavior, we talk politics and economics. That interview begins about 12 minutes and 35 seconds in. Then Boston Globe columnist Michael Cohen joins me. I talked to Ritholtz for about an hour, so that interview begins at 1:16. A very special conversation with Michael Cohen today. I highly recommend that one. And I love to talk about the conspiracy theories that are spreading throughout this country in a terrifying way, but with experts who understand them. And Travis View is one of the three co-hosts that hosts the QAnon Anonymous podcast. That interview begins at an hour and 51 minutes or so. My name is Pete Dominic. It is time to stand up with me right now. Let's do it. Hello, my friends, and welcome to your Wednesday. I hope you are having a decent week. How's everything going here on July 15th? I think it's like the middle of summer, isn't it? How are you hanging in there? Love to hear from you, and I've got a great lineup of guests joining me today. I had a really special, thoughtful conversation with Michael Cohen, who's a Boston Globe columnist I just mentioned. I'm just really happy with this conversation and that I get to share it with you. I think you're going to like it. Of course, it's always great talking with Barry Ritholtz, and Travis View is a really interesting guy who hosts a very important podcast about the conspiracy theories that the QAnon folks follow and more. It's a great podcast, QAnon Anonymous. So a great lineup of guests joining me here on the podcast today, and I'm very happy with all three of these conversations. And I talked with Ritholtz for like an hour. And, well, anyway, lots to get to on today's show. And I want to get right to it because it's late. I had a weird day myself. Not weird. It just had a ton of work to do because I got hired to host an award show. And I had to tape it from my house because everything is virtual now. And I'm excited about that. I'm happy to have the work and do the work. But it was a lot of work and took most of the day. And then I went and tape the interviews, and I'm not complaining about anything. I'm just telling you why there's not a lot up front here on the top of the show because it's already pretty late, and I want to get this podcast out and posted and get all these conversations up for you. It's a lot of work producing a podcast every day, and a lot of podcasts have like 15 producers. You ever hear The Daily on the New York Times? At the end of the show, he thanks like 75 people for producing the podcast. I'm like, Jesus Christ, dude, you did like 20 minutes. Look, a 20-minute podcast. Who are these 20 people working on it? I do like 2-hour podcasts, and it's just me. And I hate to keep comparing myself and complaining. I'm just trying to give you a perspective of how much it takes to put into it. And, you know, does the quality of the product match the amount of the resources? I'm going to go out on a limb and say I'm not sure that it does when it comes to the New York Times. I like that podcast. I think it's great. But what are these 75 people doing? What are they giving him a pedicure while he's conducting the interviews? What could they possibly be doing? I book this show. I tape the show. I edit the show. Sorry. It just seems a little bit. You got to hear. I'm going to go find it for tomorrow's show and play you the end of The Daily where I'm telling you he lists. It sounds like a commencement speech. He's just saying names over and over. All right, well, now let's get to some of the news. Tommy Tuberville defeated Jeff Sessions in the Alabama Senate runoff, and that's just a fantastic story because Jeff Sessions was the first United States Republican senator to endorse Trump for president all the way back, I think, in 2015. He was the first senator to endorse him. Everybody else was like, we're not going to get behind this insane lunatic, and they disparaged him and called him all kinds of names, including people like Lindsey Graham. But Jeff Sessions, he came out for him quick because he saw the white supremacy ran deep in Trump. And Jeff Sessions is named after Jeff Beauregard. He's got to support Donald Trump. So everybody else eventually fell in line, but Sessions was the first one. So Trump gave him the position of attorney general, thinking that he'd be his Roy Cohn. He'd be his Bill Barr. Unfortunately for Trump, Jeff Sessions, when it came time to investigate the Russia connection, he's like, I can't. I gotta recuse myself from this, sir. I say I gotta recuse myself. And then, of course, Trump savaged him and then fired him. And then Jeff Sessions came back and wanted his Republican seat back, and he started kissing Trump's ass again. So pathetic. What a pathetic wretch of a human being that Jeff Sessions is. The Sessions name is a disgrace. Am I going too far? Do you think I'm going too far? But imagine that. It's like Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham. These are people, these are grown adults who Donald Trump has savaged. Their wives, their father in Ted Cruz's situation, and of course Jeff Sessions, his whole life, and Lindsey Graham savaged them, but they kiss his ass. It's what kind of a person does that? Could you respect anybody who does that? Crazy. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm ranting. Said I wasn't going to say anything, and here I am ranting. What else did I want to tell you today? Barry Weiss, New York Times columnist, resigned, and everybody's flipping out about that. Talk with Michael Cohen about that at length, so I'm not going to say much more about it. Mary Trump, Trump's niece, says the president should resign in an interview in her new book, which is pretty cool. Dr. Fauci is imploring Americans to trust respected medical authorities who have a track record of telling the truth. And what else? The other story. Seb Gorka. Seb Gorka has been appointed to the National Security Education Board by Donald Trump, whatever the hell that is. But he's a terrible person. Just a terrible, terrible person. And Trump, this is, of course, why he qualifies for a position in the Trump administration. Florida hit a single-day coronavirus death record of 132 as infections near 300,000. The Trump administration rescinded its rule barring international students from living in the U.S. while taking classes online this fall. That's good. Thank you. That's progress, right? Wait, they rescinded the rule barring internet. Okay. Policy change issued by Immigration and Customs Enforcement required international college students to take at least one in-person class or leave the country. The White House will instead apply the rule to new students. So I think they've walked that back. Also, the Trump administration ordered hospitals to bypass the CDC and send all coronavirus patient information to a central database maintained by the Department of Health and Human Services. That seems like a really good idea. Just bypass the CDC. Speaking of CDC, 4 former CDC chiefs rebuked Trump's repeated efforts to subvert CDC guidelines in a Washington Post op-ed where they accused the president of undermining science with partisan potshots, arguing that his extraordinary efforts to diminish the agency's guidance were contributing to a resurgence of coronavirus cases across the United States. They said they cannot recall over our collective tenure a single time when political pressure led to a change in the interpretation of scientific evidence. Well, we've got numerous examples of it in this administration. Also, this is terrifying news. The Strategic National Stockpile may not have the capacity to supply medical professionals with personal protective equipment. Fantastic. Speaking of great, when asked why Black Americans are still being killed by police, Trump responded, "So are white people." Listen to this interview with CBS News' Catherine Hendrich, is it? Asking the president about George Floyd. You got it. I'm sorry I got to play this for you, but I want you to hear it because this is crazy stuff.
Let's talk about George Floyd. You said George Floyd's death was a terrible thing.
Terrible.
Why are African Americans still dying at the hands of law enforcement in this country?
And so are white people. So are white people. What a terrible question to ask. So are white people. More white people, by the way. More white people.
More white people. More white people, by the way. Statistics show, if you care about statistics, that while more white Americans are killed by the police overall, minorities are killed at higher rates. Obviously, there's way more white Americans. Black people are like 12, 13% of America. A 2018 study found that black men are 3.5 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement than white men. Another study published in late June found that black people were 3 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement officers than white people. In the same interview, Trump also defended his attacks on the movement to take down the Confederate statues and symbols by claiming that it's simply a freedom of speech issue. Oh, man. Anyway, moving on to one final thing I want to play before I get to my guests. My friend Mark Nolte is a really good guy, one of the best guys I know in my life. He is a family man and a leader in his community, and he's even thinking about running for governor of Iowa. We're good friends. We became friends through the show. He's a longtime listener, supporter, subscriber of the show, and we are Polo friends. You know what that is? Polo Friends, the Marco Polo app where you make videos and you share them. I think it's especially good for men. I highly recommend it for men because you have these conversations where you say a bunch of things and then you just send it and then the other guy responds. And sometimes I think men aren't as good in exchanges on the phone. I'm being a little sexist, but I think there's some truth to this, and I think it will enhance the relationship of your male friendships, guys. So I highly recommend you download that app and use it. So I just want to play for you right now this raw, heartfelt, I asked him for his permission, but message that my friend Mark Nolte sent me when he found out the schools were not going to reopen in Iowa. Here it is right now.
So our schools decided tonight they can't open in person this fall. And I'm just heartbroken for all those kids who that teacher might be the only person in their world that gives a shit about them. That might be the only place in their world they feel safe. Might be the only place they get food. And we've taken that away from them because people couldn't be asked to wear a fucking mask. Literally the least thing they could do. And that proved to be too difficult. I am just heartbroken at where we're at as a country. That we are that selfish and racist and ignorant and lazy. And the so-called Christians who are just heartbroken. Feel so bad for these kids. And we'll watch it play out in families that have to give up their jobs because they can't afford daycare. And there'll be a rise in unemployment and a rise in homelessness and mental health and suicides and incarceration. It will all play out because people couldn't be bothered to put a fucking piece of fabric over their face to keep their droplets in because our fascist president told them they didn't have to. And that's where we are at as a country. We care so little about each other that people couldn't be bothered to do that.
That's my friend Mark Nolte out in Iowa City. That, of course, was meant to be a private message, but it was so raw and heartfelt and honest. And I know a lot of people feel the way that Mark feels, including myself, obviously. And so I thought I would share that with you and not keep it private. I asked him if I could, and he said, by all means. I hope he does run for governor in Iowa. I'll do everything I can to help him get elected. Okay. Let me get to my first guest. Joining me now is my good friend, Barry Ritholtz. He's on Twitter, @Ritholtz. He is the principal at his own firm, Ritholtz Wealth Management. He runs one of the most popular blogs on finance and the entire internet. It's called The Big Picture. And you should subscribe to his daily reads. You should get his book, Bailout Nation. Love Barry Ritholtz. We had an hour-long conversation, and I want to share it with you. We covered a lot of ground, and everybody always loves when he joins me. Here he is, Ritholtz. I am recording now, Barry Ritholtz, and you are wearing a Dunning-Kruger T-shirt, which is effing hilarious.
Dunning-Kruger University. I'll tell you the funny part about this. So when I interviewed David Dunning, the Dunning of Dunning-Kruger, later in the interview, I asked him for examples of his own Dunning-Kruger, meaning metacognition, where we are not aware of our own lack of expertise in a given area. It turns out that understanding and being able to self-evaluate your skill is in and of itself a skill that correlates to expertise. Experts know how good they are. The average person typically thinks they're better than they are. So he said we had no idea about the trademark and potential revenue opportunities of the phrase Dunning-Kruger. So why would we, two academics, trademark the phrase Dunning-Kruger? And he goes, there's all sorts of Dunning-Kruger material out there. So after the interview, I go to Amazon, search for Dunning-Kruger. A ton of stuff comes up, including Dunning-Kruger University T-shirt, and I had to get it. And it's just my
Dunning-Kruger effect in the field of psychology. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias in which people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. Do you have an example?
All right, so the example I use in presentations is golfer. You know the Pro-Am, and I'm not a golfer, but the Pro-Am Tour, there's a professional teamed up with an amateur, and all these pros and all these amateurs play against each other to raise money for charity. Pro-Am Tour. A professional and amateur could put the ball on the tee and literally hit the ball within inches of each other, send it 200 yards down the fairway, and the ball lands within inches of each other. The amateur just swings it and makes a solid connection, and the ball goes flying. And it was a lucky shot, but to the amateur, he says to himself, this isn't so hard. I hit the ball right down the middle of the fairway. It landed exactly where it was supposed to. I'm great at this stuff. The pro notices a couple of tiny little hitches in his swing. Gee, I didn't rotate my hips fast enough. I should have kept my head down longer. The follow-through didn't go as far as it should have. It was a decent shot, but had I fixed those little things, it would have gone another 30 yards, and the next drive, I'll do the same thing. And so even though the results are effectively the same, in one case, the amateur has no idea they just got lucky, and they think that it's a repeatable skill when it isn't. In the other case, the professional with the skill set is better capable of not only evaluating how they did, but understanding what they did wrong and how to improve it. And when you're looking at a curve of or something competitive, playing it at a very high level, you become very aware of all your strengths and weaknesses and where there's room for improvement. I love the phrase metacognition. The ability to understand appropriately your own skill level and understand where you're actually skillful and where you're lucky.
Well, so then how does this psychological effect play out during the pandemic in the American public?
So where to begin? All right, so I'll give you a positive example and a negative example. So starting out in New York, very, very badly hit in the beginning. De Blasio, the mayor of New York City, was late to shut things down. Cuomo was also not on top of this. But Cuomo, of all the leading political figures, Cuomo turned around and recognized pretty quickly that, hey, we're not getting any leadership from the White House. I have no expertise in this. I am ignorant about this, and I got to get up to speed quickly. So Cuomo goes out and he speaks to people that effectively managed to lock this down. He speaks to Fauci at CDC. He speaks to Angela Merkel in Germany. He speaks to the woman who is the prime minister of New Zealand and said, what did you guys do and how did it work? And then Cuomo starts holding these daily press conferences where he brings bad news. He talks about the data. He talks about why we're going to get through this. And he was very positive and he owned the mistakes. He said, this is something that's our responsibility and the buck stops with me, but here's what we're going to do to fix it. And here's a guy who understood that he had a lack of expertise, reached out to the experts, implemented their recommendations. Sunday, there were 0 deaths in New York State. That's just, considering this is the epicenter in the United States, they did it right. And New York is less of a state than it's a country like New Zealand or Germany. It figured it out. It's an international location. It has both JFK and Newark bringing disease and all sorts of contagious people from all around the world. They figured out how to deal with it. Now, the opposite effect, so let's look at a few. Arizona, Texas, and Florida is another example. The governors, 3 Republican governors, Texas, much savvier governor who said, hey, we reopened a little too soon. Let's shut this down. Let's get this under control before it spirals out of our ability to manage. Arizona and Florida, for some reason, they're, magical thinking. They're not doing what other states have done.
Wait, you're saying Texas's governor is savvy?
Texas's governor and Arizona and Florida's governor all were brazen and ignored the hard-won facts that New York earned.
They seem to, at least in the case of Florida and Texas, catering to what Trump wanted.
Arizona also, absolutely.
Yeah.
The difference being, as the governor of Texas quickly realized he made a mistake and he reversed himself.
Did he?
And
What
Texas,
did he? I don't even realize that he did.
They shut down the reopening. They canceled restaurants. They canceled bars. They canceled a lot of stuff. I don't know who is the dumbest governor in the country, but it looks like we have a two-person race between Arizona and Florida. That'll be interesting to see who manages to kill more of their own citizens on a per capita basis. And I'm not joking or being glib. This is just malfeasance and reckless homicide by people who are just wholly unqualified to do their job. And my mom is in Florida, and Governor DeSantis better hope nothing happens to her, because I'm going to hold him personally responsible.
Oh, how will Ritholtz seek revenge on Governor DeSantis? Are you threatening the governor of Florida?
No. I will use every last dime to make his life as miserable as I can legally. I will donate money to his opposition. I will be a one-man Lincoln project in Florida for him.
What if his opponent running against him is a dead fern? Do you think that it has a chance?
50-50. I think that's a dead heat. Absolutely.
It's so bad.
But it's, the problem with tragic news is that you eventually get pretty inured to it. You get used to it.
Right.
We have lost more people in the COVID-19 pandemic in the United States than were killed in World War I. More people died in this disaster than World War I.
And more recently in Vietnam. It's 135,000 American deaths now. There were 58,000 deaths in the Vietnam War. I mean,
57,000.
People making those comparisons. It's a different kind of thing.
It's a 9/11 a day. It's insane. Yeah. It's absolutely insane.
And I mean, you mentioned Andrew Cuomo doing a good job, but he deserves a good amount of criticism as well. I mean, even though
he was late. He was late to recognize this.
32,000 New Yorkers died.
27,000 in New York City, 32,000 in the state.
Yeah,
that's a big number. Now, a big part of the problem is that there was no leadership at the top, and New York City was the first, real major city that got it. So they were working blind. That's the tragedy of what's going on now in the Sun Belt. Is after New York City learned the hard way what has to be done. You have to get PPE for your frontline responders, for police, for medical, for doctors, for nurses, for the essential services. That's job one. If you can't do that, then you're just going to kill a ton of essential people.
What do you think? How much have you thought about? You seem like a guy who probably has thought about or read about or attended seminars in terms of leadership. Your name is on your firm. You're a leader of sorts at your firm. I mean, do you have thoughts about leadership, like boilerplate thoughts? Because when I think about what has happened in our country, I think there is so much to blame on leadership. And because when you compare it to the lack thereof, really, when you compare it to World War II or other things that this country or other countries had to overcome, there is always, these profiles in leadership that history looks back on and says, this leader did this or did that or didn't do this or didn't do that. How do you see the lack of leadership and the responsibility that is played, or can we overcome major challenges without leadership?
So,
because it seems like that's what we're trying to do.
You're at a huge disadvantage if you're running a football team with no coach or no quarterback, and that's what the United States is. We have no coach. We are, to quote Michael Lewis, a coachless nation. And so it becomes challenging. So what ended up happening? You have regional leaders stepping up to partially fill the void left by the lack of national leadership. So New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts form the Northeast Coalition. They try and buy PPE together. They work out an agreement that says anybody who comes from states with more than this level of infections will not be admitted, and anybody with this level of infections will have to self-quarantine for a certain number of days, but it's not the same when the full strength and determination of the United States says, "Hey, enough's enough. We're going to make arrangements to find protective equipment, gloves, masks, shields, etc." And Uncle Sam goes out and buys enough for everybody. Who's not going to sell to Uncle Sam? Instead, Trump set up this bizarre competition between states. So not only did it hurt the weaker, poorer states, but it just drove prices up. It was you couldn't ask for a worse way to do it. Oh, and by the way, the power exists under one of the defense acts, the Defense Acquisition Act, where Trump could literally nationalize different companies or give them an order where stop making these widgets. You're now making masks, and no, don't make vacuum bags. You're now making masks, and I need 100 million of them a month for the next 6 months. And you guys, you're done
and you're going to get paid. I mean, we're paying.
Yeah, we're going to pay you
that.
a competitive rate, right?
And in this case, by the way, no one's buying what you make normally anyway. So would you like the contract or not? Right. I mean, it's not 100%. Like it's some kind of
So I mean, we could talk about disbanding the pandemic emergency response team and all the stuff that went beforehand. So this was teed up to be a disaster from January 20th, 2017. But the real debacle started January, February, March of this year when it was pretty clear that the president, who, by the way, in January looked like he had a reasonable chance to win re-election, and now is trailing by 5% in Texas. I mean, when was the last time a Democrat candidate for president was 5 points ahead in Texas? All the surveys are that he still gets better marks on his handling of the economy, which is kind of funny because he effectively inherited that from his predecessor. But COVID-19 is killing him. Parents are frustrated that he hasn't put together any sort of plan to reopen schools.
This week's
seniors. Major. And what's amazing is that he just threaded the needle in 2016. What was it, like 120,000 votes across 5 states? Now the swing states that he needs most, places like Florida, Arizona shouldn't be in play. North Carolina shouldn't be in play. Iowa shouldn't be in play.
You already said that Texas is in play.
Yeah. So he's losing suburban women. He's losing college-educated white men. That's who was his stronghold. Once you start to lose non-college-educated white men, once that edge of his base starts to fray, the question now is, how short are his coattails? It looks, there's a consensus developing on Wall Street that there's going to be a Democratic sweep across House, Senate, and White House. And I just read a study today showing here's all the years when you had one party rule, and here's what it looked like for the market. And all things considered, it's pretty good. It's not that bad.
Yeah, I read that. I was reading your
it's a terrible. By the way, that's a terrible data analysis because you have a sample set of like 50. Come back in 10,000 years and we can discuss.
Well, the issue a lot of people are concerned with, though, is whether or not it'll be a free and fair election. I don't think that he's going to try to cancel the election or postpone the election like some people are saying. I think he's just going to make it really hard for Democrats, likely Democratic voters, to go and cast their vote. What do you think about that?
So I read something interesting, and the problem with reading anything like this, my Dunning-Kruger, is that I'm aware of the fact that I don't have an expertise in this, and I am very much engaging in some wishful thinking. So I have to be circumspect when we talk about this. That said, there is some data showing that his constant drumbeat about mail-in votes, which are essentially absentee votes, they're the same thing, is dissuading Republicans from using absentee ballots and may actually accidentally suppress his own voters.
Not only that,
it'd be ironic and amusing. And
he's making it. He may make it harder for his own voters to cast their votes, and he's killing a lot of his own voters by not taking control in the pandemic. I don't mean to make light of that, but there is some serious analysis that the people that are often, many of the people that are going to vote for him are dying.
Not in sufficient numbers that it will impact the election, but in significant enough numbers that it's impacting. So it's not going to affect the number of voters. The death count is not that horrific. However, when you look at your state and when you were told it's going to disappear, it'll be gone like a miracle, it'll be gone in the summer, you don't need masks, we can reopen, it's all fine, and that all goes to shit. Well, at a certain point, listen, I know he said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and his voters wouldn't care. But that's one person. If you shoot 100,000 people throughout the country, voters start to pay attention. And that's kind of what's been going on.
Well, what do you make of the analysis that, business leaders wanted to reopen? I mean, it's always been, in my opinion, and not forget my opinion, I think yours and a lot smarter people when it comes to economics than me, that it's been a false choice. It's a false choice to reopen because if you reopen, no one's coming to buy your stuff. No one's getting on your plane. No one's going to your theater. No one's coming to your show. No one's buying your stuff.
People are flying. People are definitely flying.
People are flying, but they're not. What airlines are not furloughing thousands? I mean, the airlines are suffering. Let's be clear.
Oh no. So you're better off opening correctly than incorrectly. There's no doubt about that. The Chamber of Commerce that I have, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that I have lambasted over the years for their very unfriendly viewpoints for consumers, for investors, for all these things, put together an open letter to the president and the Governors Association, basically begging them for guidance on social distancing and mask wearing in public. And they said, we normally don't ask for more regulation, but we want some leadership because the only way to get this pandemic under control is through through testing, contact tracing, social distancing, and wearing masks. And it was signed by the National Retail Federation, who's dying to get people in their stores. Nobody wants to come in their stores.
Right.
By the Restaurant Association, by all these different business organizations that are historically anti-small government, anti-regulation, anti-government involvement, are begging for leadership and begging for guidance. And once you lose, it's not even center-right. Once you lose the anti-regulation, free market business community, you have to wonder how bad is the spanking you're going to get in November. You and I have talked about this in the past, and I said, everybody is so obsessed with 2016, they're ignoring 2018. Maybe he pulls a rabbit out of his hat, but if you project today forward, it's a 400-vote electoral college landslide with the Senate flipping and a lot of state governorships and state houses flipping. You haven't seen the Republicans abandoning ship yet. That's coming. You think that's coming?
Before the election.
Oh, God, there are people that are going to basically, so far, the only one who can legitimately claim to have some distance between himself and the president on the Republican side is Mitt Romney. Everybody else is basically
Susan Collins and in deep trouble.
She's gonna lose. I mean, the question is it 3 or 4 seats in the Senate, or is it 5, 6, 7, 8?
Yeah, well, at what point does, that's the only thing that Mitch McConnell cares about is being the Senate Majority Leader, having all that power. At what point does he abandon Trump? At what point does the Republican Senate abandon Donald Trump, if at all? I don't think that they do.
So for the history books, it's too late because they've been grand enablers of his demagoguery and his racism and all his incompetence.
Their horrible trespasses shall not be forgiven.
Right. So history is going to be very harsh for Lindsey Graham and for Mitch McConnell and for a whole bunch of
Claire McCaskill, who former senator colleague of his, called him a piece of shit the other day.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I've seen her on TV. She is a no-nonsense. And, in a libel case, truth is a defense. So I think she's okay. I think that's fair. So,
well, we'll see about the political analysis of it all and what the outcome is.
You rarely see an incumbent president. So here we are. It's, what are we, 4 months, literally 4 months away from the election. You rarely see a sitting president with polls like they are 4 months out. Yeah, anything can happen, but you if you had to pick a candidate who would rather be under the immediate circumstances, you would much rather be the challenger with these poll numbers than
exactly. I mean, but we've never had. The only thing that you could even come close to comparing would be a war, the war in Iraq, which is raging. Or during the 2004 election, it was astonishing to me that John Kerry lost that election. But the power of the incumbency.
No, people don't change horses midstream. The history is during war. There's a rally around the flag.
This is way worse than a war, and there's no rally around anything.
But
there's no unification.
Actually, that's funny you say that. When you look around the rest of the world, there's a pretty substantial rally around the flag effect in most countries.
It's a good point. And I haven't really
just
looked
not
at that.
This one.
I haven't really looked at the way that other countries have unified instead of divided. And I hear a little bit about Australia because I talk to my buddy in Australia every day, David Campbell, and but you always hear the loudest voices. But it would seem that in places like South Korea, Scandinavia,
Germany, Switzerland, Japan, go down the list.
They've come together.
Italy and Spain, look at how terrible they were. Now, the fascinating thing is the Anglo countries, Australia, UK, and the United States, have done a pretty crappy job managing this. Canada, on the other hand, seems to have its act together. So I don't know why the UK and the US have done such a poor job, but the UK is right behind us. They're just steps behind us. In nobody's as bad as we are, but they've done a pretty crappy job also.
Well, the difference would seem, honest to God, Barry, that most world leaders care about their people to some extent.
True,
or to a large
or they
extent.
can fake it pretty well,
or they can fake it, or they care to a point that their votes matter. I mean,
to be fair, no president has been treated as poorly as this president.
That's a good point.
Right,
not America,
Kennedy, not Lincoln. No president has received the sort of unfair treatment that even his Supreme Court, which I've been reading about over the past few days, how masterfully John Roberts, a conservative stalwart and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, managed to protect the institution, keep it above politics, vote with the left in order to maintain credibility of the institution. John Roberts has played Donald Trump like a fiddle, and I find that to be just fascinating. That's what happens when you step into an arena where you are Dunning-Kruger ignorant and have no idea that you're ignorant. Roberts, on the other hand, has come up through the system over years and years and years as a judge, an appellate judge.
I hate him so much for what he did.
Can I tell you something?
United and the Voting Rights Act, that it's so hard for me to give him any kind of credit.
I have mad respect for what he did to protect his institution and help keep the country together by being an effective counterbalance to essentially a president who does not respect limits of the law, does not respect the balance of power. John Roberts tamed Donald Trump. He's still, completely out of control. And, the commuting of the sentence this week was just, drain the swamp. You are the swamp. And I'm looking forward to the debates. I'm hoping Biden has enough gas in the tank to mop the floor with him. Even if he loses the debates, I still think Biden wins.
I don't even see that. I don't think at all about debates happening. I don't think they happen. Not because
of
COVID, not because of the pandemic. They could easily take the safety measures to get them in the same room.
Right.
No doubt about it. But
you think one of them is going to chicken out?
I think Trump will definitely chicken out.
No, he did okay in the debate with. So he was able to bluff his way through that debate because. Despite, I just finished the book Dark Towers about Deutsche Bank, and their part of the book is about Russian money laundering, and part of the book is about their relationship with Donald Trump. It's quite fascinating. Despite him having his company's filed for bankruptcy multiple times, defaulted on multiple obligations, money he owed. He had enough of a representation as a successful businessman on his television show that carried the day. But that narrative that he created, that image of himself as a powerful and knowledgeable and talented businessman, has been laid pretty bare by how inept the government has been for that. It's not just this; it's everything. I had a conversation with someone whose family is in the Midwest and are farmers, and they voted for Trump in 2016. And I'm like, so heading into 2020, the trade war, are they enjoying it? Are they enjoying the huge spate pre-COVID of bankruptcies and suicides? Farmers are committing suicide in record numbers. And up until about 6 months ago, this woman's family said they were voting for the incumbent. And the past few months, as we are looking at COVID, the safest place in the world is the farm. No one's around for miles except for your immediate family. There's no interaction with other people. You have all the food you need. What could be better? Well, if no one's buying your food and you got no money in the bank because of a trade war where you were used as a pawn with the Chinese. And I'm sure a number of farmers are going to vote, re-up their 2016 vote. But at this point, you can't say you didn't know what you were signing up for. The people who checked one box in 2016 arguably could, and Dunning-Kruger is our theme today, could say, hey, we didn't know. We had no idea. Well, now you know.
Right.
And whatever you do going forward, it's tough for that plausible deniability to show up.
Let's talk about your most recent column. I don't know if it's your most recent column, but at Bloomberg Opinion, where you are a columnist, and it starts with the stock market has been on a tear for the past 3 months, and big tech gets much of the credit. A lot of ordinary people who aren't financial experts, who aren't necessarily paying day-to-day attention to the market and their 401ks, which is something I think is pretty unhealthy to do psychologically, but still are confused because we pay enough attention to it as to why the stock market is doing so well in the worst economic crisis that we have seen in our lifetimes and in 2 generations.
Yes, so this is a question that comes up time and time again. How is the market so irrational? The economy looks terrible. Unemployment is 30 or 40 million people. GDP is cut in half. Why is the stock market continuing to go higher and higher? And one of the things I love to do is to find a data point that people aren't paying attention and see if I can pull that thread and find myself a conclusion that's unexpected. And the conclusion that I started looking at is, well, what's doing the best in the market? And it turns out that the biggest technology stocks are doing the best. In fact, for the past 5 years, if you look at just 6 stocks, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, and Microsoft, from 2015 to 2019, the value of the S&P 500 rose $6 trillion. Those 6 stocks accounted for $4 trillion of it, about 2/3. And hey, that's a kind of crazy data point. Why would 6 stocks be so responsible for so much of the S&P's gains? So I went back and I looked at the data from when the pandemic started and the market bottomed till now, and the market's up 40%. Those 6 stocks are up almost 60%, and you're trying to figure out why. So the first thing I did is look at where their revenue comes from. And the majority of their revenue comes from overseas. For Apple, it's as much as 60%. For Microsoft and Netflix, it's about 50%. Facebook and Google, it's like 54 and 55. The only one that wasn't a majority of overseas revenue was Amazon. And they are unique. Amazon of everybody is uniquely situated to profit from a lockdown and a pandemic because of their logistics and their delivery of food and everything else. So why would that be that companies that, by the way, the average S&P 500 company has a 42% of their revenue comes from overseas. Mid cap is about 35%. Small cap is about 20%. So why are the companies that are so big and so dependent on overseas doing so much better? Because the rest of the world is doing so much better managing their pandemic than we are. The numbers in the United States are shocking. The United States has 4.2% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the COVID-19 infections and 24% of the deaths. There's no other way to describe it. This is national incompetence, and the companies that are most dependent on overseas are the ones that are doing so well. It would make sense that despite a really mediocre U.S. economy, if the rest of the world is managing their pandemic and reopening sooner, well, the companies that get their revenue from those areas are going to do really well. And I don't know if this is the only reason. There are a lot of other factors that affect why the psychology of investors drives certain stocks in certain markets higher. But it certainly is telling that the best performing stocks are the ones that are least dependent on the U.S. economy. And that says something about how poorly we've managed this pandemic.
Let me ask you about I don't know what word to use, if it's definite, if it is imminent, but housing and rent crisis.
Yeah.
Where do you see the housing crisis, the renting crisis, the eviction epidemic going? I mean, because isn't that the real, I don't know, it even sounds too, there's got to be a better phrase than canary in the coal mine. Like it's a blast. It's not just a bird chirping. I mean, how do you measure? You've always talked about housing as a measurement. How do we measure that right now? Because it would seem that everybody's been given a reprieve for the past few months. They've been giving mulligans. There's different things that we've all been able to take advantage of to not have to pay our rent or our mortgage for a couple months and so on. But that's coming to an end, right?
Right. Well, we'll find out if it's coming to an end. I just sent you a link from Nathan Tankis, who is a housing analyst. In April, 12% of apartment units made no payment whatsoever. 12% made a partial payment. So that combines for 24%. That number jumped to 31% in May, 22 and 19, 30% in June, and 32% in July, meaning during the first week of the month, 32% of the people did not make either their rent or their mortgage payment in full. And that's a pretty shocking, that's a shocking number. It's worse for renters than it is for homeowners. For renters, it's something like 36% in July didn't pay their rent, and homeowners were 30%. And of course, it varies along the income skew. That's not a younger, poorer people missed 41% of their rent payments versus older, wealthier people who missed less than 20%. But that's kind of what we're looking at. This is a pretty substantial warning that people who were employed, people who were getting a payroll and are not, are one of the first things you can't pay is your rent. That's probably most people's biggest monthly expense, especially if you have a family and you have to house more than one person. If you're a husband, wife, and a couple of kids, that's probably your biggest monthly expense.
Yeah.
And, a number of states and cities have done eviction freezes. You can't just throw somebody out. First of all, where are they going to go? And second of all, who's coming in? Nobody's, in the midst of a lockdown, nobody's coming into your property. No one's looking at anything. So I don't know the solution. And,
which is why there's been an increase in landlords demanding sexual acts from their tenants.
That is not a joke. That has actually been happening.
That's true. By the way, if I could blow whatever guy I owe my mortgage to save a couple months, I'm just saying.
I'll see you at 5. I'll tell you the other thing that's kind of insane. And I had this conversation with someone the other day. You and I talked about the PPP loan, which my firm took money out to pay our salaried, not our client-facing advisors. In March, when we thought the world was coming to an end, by April, We got our check. By May, it looked like things were not going to be a depression, a worst case scenario. And we said, we're not going to apply for forbearance. In June, the market was back to pretty close to all-time highs. We said, we don't need this money. We returned it. And in July, I applied for a line of credit. We've never used any debt or leverage in the firm. We've self-funded it the whole time. However, we got a lot of criticism for it. But there's a bigger question, a bigger philosophical question I want to ask. And that's, why the fuck am I in the middle of this? Why am I, as an employer, providing health care why are all employers providing health care for their employees? Every other country, every other modern, industrialized, wealthy economy, the government provides that directly. It's from the government to the taxpayer.
Because it gives you leverage. It gives you leverage to attract the best talent to Ritholtz Wealth Management.
Yes.
So that before they go to Dominic Wealth Management, where I offer a shit policy.
Right. Well, but that's not my question. The question isn't why am I offering
I don't think
it.
Why
is every business in the country offering health care? Why isn't the government doing it? And
I don't think that's a legitimate argument, what I just made. I've just heard that.
No, the
only argument I've ever heard, and I think it stinks.
Well, you want to, when the playing field is such that businesses provide 401k and healthcare, and you want to attract the best talent, you're going to try and provide the best healthcare and the best retirement plans that you can. But that's the current situation. Why did the government ask employers to get as a middleman between them and the person who they wanted to guarantee a paycheck for?
Right.
Germany does it without the businesses in the middle. Japan, South Korea, Switzerland, lots of countries have figured out how to directly make these payments. So the question that the pushback to PPP raised is, why have we insisted, I know why, but I'm asking you, why have we insisted that businesses be in between the government and the individual as a provider of healthcare, as a provider of retirement plans, as a provider of paycheck guarantees, unemployment insurance?
This country hates government. It hates.
No, worse than that. It's even worse than that. This country hates anything having to do with socialism, even though we have many socialist tendencies.
Right.
We are a nation in denial about all the socialism, from Social Security to Medicaid, down to the local community library. We do not like community-funded things, because we look at those socialist countries in Europe and those communist countries in Asia, and we're America. We're about freedom and free markets. But I don't understand why you can't just pick and choose the best from the smorgasbord of policies that work.
Freedom, really redefine freedom for people. Freedom is the freedom to leave your job and start your own business or pursue work at another firm without having to fear that you're going to lose your health insurance because your kid has asthma and you can't afford it, or you have something, or just for the obvious reasons of why you need health insurance. That's what freedom is. Freedom is the ability to move, the ability to leave, knowing that you're not going to lose your health care. It's not freedom otherwise. It's called job lock. That's actually the term for it. That's not freedom. Job lock is not freedom. It's the antithesis of freedom.
I think we've mentioned this before, but I have a very vivid recollection of being in Europe for business during the financial crisis in 08 or 09. I think I was there for a conference and to speak at some event. And my office is in New York City. And I couldn't help but be struck by the difference between London and New York, the difference between Brussels and New York. Just the vibe, the energy of everybody in New York was just freaked out, completely clenched and puckered even. And when you go to Europe, hey, listen, you could tell things were off a little bit, but it's not like it was here. Because in the middle of the crisis, the bars were not jamming. People weren't out drinking or smoking and hanging out and having a good time. People were totally freaked out that they were going to get fucked. And in Europe, things might have been a little chill, but You go to any bar, any restaurant, it was popping, it was happening, there was an energy. These are the big capitals, places like Brussels and London. It was banging, and New York was just completely. Now, obviously,
you're talking
New York
about
has more finance exposure,
2008,
but 08-09 crisis, yeah.
All right.
And the huge difference between the two is that people in Europe didn't worry about being evicted, about not having health care.
Yeah, dude, when I lost my job at Sirius, before I lost my job, I talked about it on the air all the time. I said, my worst fear about losing my job is losing my health insurance, and the nightmare that will be for my family. And it has been. Luckily for Obamacare, we've been able to find affordable policies because, they subsidize your income. But I mean, there's all kinds of catches to it and so on as well. I mean, even if you made really good money last year, if you don't have a job right now, it doesn't matter how responsible you were and how much money you save, because insurance costs so much money for a family of four. And I'm talking about a healthy family of four.
Yeah.
Now, my daughter's got scoliosis and my other daughter just broke her arm. That shit adds up real quick. And this is unique to our country. And I hear this from my Canadian listeners all the time, that they think we're crazy. And no, they're not coming here for care, by the way. I mean, that is the most pernicious
they're coming here to
about
buy
healthcare, that if Canadian healthcare is so good, why do they come here all the time? Not the case.
They come here to go to Walmart and buy cheap stuff that's not taxed a lot. That's why they come here. They're certainly not coming here for 5x the cost of prescription drugs. Listen, there's a thing known as medical tourism that originated in the United States, that rather than pay what it costs in the U.S., even with insurance, people fly to India, people fly elsewhere to get elective surgery, because it's even with the insurance companies
there are insurance companies that I think are sending Americans to Canada to Canada to get insulin. The company itself, go buy the insulin there. We'll cover it. It's too expensive here. All right, so what else do we have to talk about? My big question for this week, Barry Ritholtz, is where does this end? How does it end? When does it end? And by that I mean
where does what end?
The COVID-19, because what I have been saying all week, what I've been thinking about is that even if there's an effective vaccine, it doesn't matter, because 40% of Americans won't take it, because 40% of Americans think that you can buy a kid online at Wayfair.com.
Oh, I don't believe
Democrats
that's
are
true.
Lizard people.
That 40% number sounds awfully high.
Look, if you look at the flu vaccine and how poorly it's done, because there's not enough herd immunity, because there's not enough people who get it, and that's the flu vaccine. It's not nearly as controversial as this. So 80,000 people died of the flu 2 years ago because not enough people got the vaccine. Now people are paying a lot closer attention to the vaccine. And Ritholtz, they think that Bill Gates wants to implant the chip in them. They think crazy, crazy things about the potential of what this vaccine could mean to them. So I'm concerned that if we did have an effective vaccine, not enough Americans would sign up to take it.
All right, so
that's my biggest specific primary concern about how this ends, and that it doesn't, because people won't get vaccinated.
All right, so two things.
If there is a vaccine, I mean, I'm
gonna stick with my knitting and not tell you how the epidemiology of this is, because I'm not an epidemiologist, and I can't stand listening to people who are not epidemiologists opine on exactly the subject. But there are two things I can tell you that are significant. The first is the flu vaccine. Now, understand, each year, influenza is a variety of different strains of flu. And the way the flu vaccine works is that it's a cocktail of half a dozen or so different attempts at preventing different strains. And it's really a best guess 18 months in advance as to which strains are going to be dominant where. So the flu vaccine isn't 100%. It's not perfect. Some people have mild, bad reactions to it. And for the most part, the flu for the average healthy person is not especially dangerous. On the other hand, COVID-19, even for young, healthy people, has potentially debilitating medical consequences, even if it doesn't kill you. And so it's a disease you have to take more seriously. So there's that. But the area where I do have some expertise on is behavioral economics and information theory and why people believe things that are false and what we can do about it. The people who generally are flat earthers and anti-vaxxers and don't believe global warming is real and don't believe we land on the moon and just a whole run of stuff, they are a very, very tiny group of people who command a vastly disproportionate amount of mind share. I mean, not too long ago, there were people who were saying the earth is flat. And I don't mean not too long ago, like 10,000 years ago. I mean like February, until that idiot launched himself up in a rocket and killed himself. Darwin will not be denied.
Yeah.
Numbers, because apparently in order to prove the earth is flat, they have to engage in really reckless, risky behavior. But we have this tendency to think that the bubble that we're in, like Twitter or the media or what have you, is an accurate representation of what the world is like. And that is a small percentage of people who have a fundamental flaw in their worldview. Prevents them from achieving any sort of successful understanding of the world around them.
I understand that, and I appreciate you deferring to the experts on anything. And I'm not an expert on anything, so that's why I don't spend too much time talking about it. But I do follow closely, think about a lot the spread of the conspiracy theories and how many people are being indoctrinated into them. And to me, the theories behind the global pedophile ring stuff, the QAnon stuff, are spreading as fast as the virus. Maybe not as fast. That's a stupid thing to say. Who knows how fast? Who knows how many people? But everywhere I look, everywhere I turn on social media and anecdotally, people I talk to, my cousin, my father, my best friend, is buying into some crazy stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely that.
And I think it's enough of a percentage of people. I mean, we literally need a certain, what is the percentage that we need to be vaccinated? We need a certain percentage,
80,
to wear masks to knock this thing in the
90.
ground. We need a certain percentage to get vaccinated and knock this thing in the ground. We need a certain social distancing and rules. And we're not adhering to any of those things because so many Americans are so ignorant. Enough that it matters. Enough of a percentage that it matters is what I'm saying.
Right.
Did I lose you? What happened?
So you have two things going on. First, you have a president that is divisive and engaging in tribalism because he thinks it works to his benefit. And to be fair, it did work to his benefit.
But he's spreading the conspiracy theories, though. Right. It's not that he's divisive or that it works.
No, both.
You have a president who is this is my complaint about him at the RNC. He is the leading conspiracy. He rose to political prominence on the wave of
birther
conspiracy theory, and he has bought and sold all the rest of them. He's sharing QAnon shit all the time. I mean, the yesterday he retweeted that fuckhead Chuck Woolery saying that CDC is wrong. I mean, that's
listen. Chuck Woolery was a game show host, and he understands epidemiology. There's no doubt that
game show hosts stick together. That's what Trump was too. Right. People should stop calling him a real estate tycoon. He was a goddamn game show host.
So I keep sending you links to post with this because it's relevant. Look, America has a Fox News problem, and it went from bad to worse. Fox News is helping to kill Americans. There's some responsibility.
Not just Fox News. It's so much deeper than that.
But Fox News is...
It's Mark Levin. It's the radio.
So you have to look at the pyramid of media, and you have... America has a Facebook problem also. Facebook
right, great point. Yeah.
Right? Facebook is terrible, although for the most part, I think Facebook allows people to exist in their little bubble of confirmation bias. And I don't know if a whole lot of people were their minds were changed by Facebook.
I want to believe that, but
existing beliefs. However, Fox News has taken an entire generation of...
Oh, somebody caught a squirrel.
Can you edit this out, or should I go mute that?
No, it's fine. I don't care. Dog's barking.
When I would have had her shut the door. We're getting an Amazon delivery, to say the least. Fox News basically has taken an entire generation of people. Hold on a second. They've taken an entire generation of people and turned them into, outraged, infuriated, miserable people. And now the good news is their average age is, 112, so they're not going to be around that long. Right. But the bad news is they have completely corrupted 5 million people a night with what Jon Stewart called Bullshit Mountain. And this, I had this whole discussion with a conservative nephew, and I'm like, you have to understand the original sin of Fox News in Roger Ailes' creation was there was never an attempt to create a legitimate, fair and balanced journalistic entity. The whole purpose was, hey, if I control the media, Richard Nixon, who Roger Ailes was a media consultant for, would not have been driven out of office. And so the entire Fox News universe with Fox at the top, and what is the Daily Caller, the one that Tucker Carlson set up? It's an entire ecosystem designed to distract the public from paying attention to things that matter, from policy, from facts. The gaslighting that's taken place from Fox News has damaged the body politic in America for years and years.
Yeah.
Now the danger is that Fox News is killing its own viewers by spreading misinformation about this. I mean, go back and I think there's a Lincoln Project video and a Washington Post video about all of the Fox News hosts who talked about this is a hoax, this is the new impeachment, this is a scam, this isn't real, it'll be gone, it's the flu. And now that the Sun Belt and the area that is heavily GOP is dealing with an out-of-control pandemic, I got to think, if I'm Fox News, I'm scared shitless about the future litigation. This could end up being some sort of a mass tort situation like BP in the Gulf.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting.
And they
because you could prove in a court that
the anchors were out saying bullshit. Yeah. There are internal memos about what has to be done, and it's pretty clear that Fox was saying one thing internally and just lying to the public. Right. Some clever class action lawyer is going to find a way to squeeze billions of dollars out of them. I wouldn't want to own Fox News stock. I can tell you that much. They are looking at a $1 billion BP-like situation down the road.
I wonder.
They better hope it's less than 200,000 deaths. It's hard to prove. It's hard to prove liability. That just because you said something wholly irresponsible and reckless on television, that you're liable. You can draw a causal connection to a death. But if this gets much worse in areas where Fox is a stronghold, I think that's going to be interesting.
That's
a couple of years.
Did you hear about that kid who his last words were, "I thought this was a hoax"?
The COVID party.
Yeah,
it's tragic. It's terrible. It's
hoax. Word of the year. Word of the last 3 years. I literally live as the crow flies 7 minutes from Sean Hannity's house. He is, to drive there would take me all of 10 minutes, but like a bird could get from my house to his house in 6 minutes. You think if we built a catapult in your yard, we could reach his house with a flaming boulder?
It'd be an awfully big catapult, but
anyway.
But if you pull some of the stuff that he said on the air, he's got blood on his hands. It was the nicest thing I could say is that it was reckless and irresponsible. And if people listen to him, they may have caught a disease that they could have easily avoided.
He's the worst. The worst. I heard he got divorced, and I was just like, I wonder why.
Is that true? I didn't know that.
Why. Yeah, he's the rumors he's dating some other woman. Whose name I forget, an on-air broadcast.
I did not know that. Tucker Carlson's been married for like 30 years, some crazy number. And
you know who he's married to?
To be fair, Who?
A hood. It's just a white hood.
Get. To be fair, of all the people in
Married to a
Fox News, he was one of the people who kind of got in Trump's ear and said, "Dude, what are you doing? You're not taking this seriously.
There's a rumor he's going to run as VP or even as president.
2024.
Not at all far-fetched. Not at all. Yeah, nothing far-fetched about that. All you need is name recognition.
Depends on the lesson you take from a reality TV star becoming president. Does that mean anybody can be president? Oprah can be president. LeBron James can be president? Yeah. Or do you notice after the election that he did a terrible job dealing with, he got away with a lot for a couple of years because we got lucky. We weren't confronted with any real challenges. Right. There were no real wars. There were no real threats. Yeah, there were a couple of hurricanes and, he went to Puerto Rico and threw them a bunch of paper towels, but it wasn't an existential threat to the nation. And it law professors and others basically talked about how he's damaging democracy and trashing institutions and breaking norms. But those are abstract and theoretical. But bungling a response to a pandemic. And I love the tweets from like 2012 and 13 from him about Barack Obama. Yeah. 4 people died of Ebola. It's your fault. The buck stops with you. Like there's always a tweet from him, which is so fantastic. But, you could shit on the American people for a long time. But at a certain point, they're going to realize, hey, this is, there's no pony in here. And they've kind of figured out that he's a fraud. I mean, everything that he promised would happen has not happened. Yes, he's put in some conservative judges, but he's ceded a huge amount of leadership and global responsibility to the Chinese. He's alienated our closest allies. He inherited, the parallel between him personally and him as a steward of policy is shocking. He was born on third base, thought he hit a triple. He inherited a ton of money. I don't know who could lose money in gambling. If you own casinos and you own New York real estate, that's as close to a sure thing as you're going to get. He screwed that up. He inherited a fantastic economy with a market that had just tripled in the previous 8 years and an economy that was doing really well. The economy continued to do really well for the next, let's call it 3 years, until he was confronted. When he could no longer skate by on bluff and bluster, when he was confronted with a real challenge, he screwed the pooch. And a lot of people got sick and a lot of people died. That pretty much any candidate on either side, Mitt Romney, John Kasich, go down. As much as I don't care for either of these politicians, I would either say that if Rubio or Ted Cruz were president for the past 4 years, you would have had a much lower death rate than you had under Trump.
I think you're right about that.
He just didn't care.
I don't know. It's hard to prove a negative, but I think you're right about that. All right, my computer is heating up. That means our conversation.
So we didn't talk about any of the stuff really we normally like to talk about.
No, we did.
Nobody gives a shit what I have to say about
That's
politics.
not true at all.
I don't give a shit what I have to say about politics.
No, well, it's not just politics, and you got to cut yourself some slack. When you talk to me, I end up talking a lot about behavior because you have a lot to say about behavior, and you have a lot. You're an expert on
cognition and decision making.
So. And that's mostly what we talk. We didn't talk as much about politics, really. You could call it that if you want, but I would argue that we were talking more about the way people think and why they think. And there's a reason why people love when I get you on the podcast. So thank you as always.
I have to share one story with you. Go ahead. So I'm talking.
I mean, as long as my computer doesn't bake,
I'm talking to somebody who lives in New York City, works in finance, voted for Trump in 2016, and when we were discussing 2020, he says, "I gotta vote for him again. I got to vote for my pocketbook." And I said to him, hey, when you live in New York City, you should ask him why he has a pocketbook. Whatever your tax benefit was from the tax cut is more than offset by the inability to deduct state taxes, the inability to deduct local taxes, the inability to deduct your home mortgage, all these changes that the 2017 Tax Act made. If you're in a blue state, you're screwed. So
blue state conservatives, blue state Trumpers got screwed.
Yeah, so when you say you're voting your pocketbook, you're not voting for him. He screwed you.
Right.
He goes, no, I don't mean my personal. I mean the economy. And this, I go, all right, so 40 million unemployed, the GDP cut in half, the worst recession since the Great Depression. This is what you want more of? So then it was,
what did he say?
Well, then the answer was, well, I think he's going to be better for Wall Street. And I go, Wall Street doesn't give a shit who's president. You're the guy who told me that Obama was going to kill the market. And practically from the first day he was there, a month after he got there, he was sworn in January 20th, the market bottomed March 7th, 2009. So 6 weeks later was the low. He was there for 6 weeks. The market took off. It didn't look back. Stocks tripled under him. How is Obama bad for the market? You want to explain to me? Now, Bush, under his, and I think presidents get too much blame and too much credit. I say that all the time. But that's the funny thing. People are going to come up with excuses to vote how they want to vote, and no amount of fact-checking, no amount of rationality is going to persuade them. But at the very least, I have a high tolerance and say, hey, if you want to vote for an incompetent, racist, misogynist, that's your choice as someone who lives in a democracy. Just don't blow smoke up my ass and tell me it's because the economy has done so well under this president and your pocketbook has done so well. So vote for the racist, but don't bullshit me that it's an economic decision.
I love it. Get him on the show for me. All right, Ritholtz, at Ritholtz. Follow him now. Thank you for joining me there. As always, my friend, I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I hope people like this.
Oops, I think I cut him off right there at the end. I think I pressed stop. Anyway, at Ritholtz, great conversation as always. Follow him on Twitter, read the Big Picture blog, subscribe to his daily reads. So many great resources, and always a great conversation with Barry Ritholtz. All right, let me now share with you my conversation with one of my favorite people to talk to is Boston Globe columnist Michael Cohen. He is on Twitter at SpeechBoy71, and he has a weekly email that he sends out, as well as his column at the Boston Globe, which I hope you'll subscribe to. It's called Truth and Consequences. It comes out on Thursdays. And we had a really interesting conversation for over an hour before I even hit record. I wish I would have recorded all that. But when I did hit record, ladies and gentlemen, this is what happened. I pressed record. There he is, one of my favorite people to talk to. And we've actually been talking for like almost an hour about a billion other things. And we probably should have pressed record a long time ago. Michael Cohen, hi.
Good to see you, Pete. How are you?
I am. I'm tired, having a hard time with thinking about the world. Took a week vacation, and that was really good. Have you gotten away at all?
I was away last week. It was really good to be away from everything for a little while.
Did you feel guilty that you went away because you felt like you might have been breaking any kind of societal rules or quarantines or anything?
No. I mean, I rented a house about upstate New York, and one thing I was struck by was just everybody up there was abiding by the same rules that we abide by in where I live, and it does feel as though at least in New York that just people seem to be taking this stuff seriously and abiding by it, and it gave me some level of comfort to know that others are approaching this pandemic in a serious way.
Was that the first time you'd left New York City since the outbreak began?
So I visited my mom was outside of Philly. I visited her a few times. Some friends, but basically for a sustained period of time, it was the longest trip out of the city.
Did you learn anything?
Did I learn anything?
Did you find yourself in that week? Because you definitely got a haircut at some point.
I mean, I got a haircut, which was very exciting. I was with my kids, and so my kids are pretty young, and so most of what I'm just doing is kind of trying to corral them, and that in itself is not a lot of time for thinking when you're trying to deal with a 6 and 8 year old. Best time
as a dad. 6 and 8's good time.
It's good, although it's a lot of work.
Well, you're doing it a lot, mostly solo.
Yeah. So it's a challenge.
Well, I a lot of respect for that. My wife always did the vast majority of the work, and I was more the rodeo clown. And I never took that for granted, but I watch how I had it easy is the point I'm trying to make it. So a lot of things I want to talk with you about. Of course, your recent columns, the Boston Globe, but I wanted to have a conversation
with you and as many people as I can about this idea of cancel culture. And people are all on all different sides of it. It's a really fascinating debate in my mind in many ways. And I wonder how you would kind of describe what it is, because I bet you my dad has not heard of it and he listens. I don't think he knows.
I don't even know that I think that it's cancel culture is kind of a weird term. I don't even know that I love that expression. To me, it's more just I think that there's a sense on the, I'm taking this perspective of the left. I mean, the right is a different kind of cancel culture going on, but I think that on the left, there's just certain orthodoxies that sort of have to be adhered to. And I think if you sort of don't adhere to them, you tend to get a lot of outsized criticism for it. And I think that sometimes at least chills some of the conversations, some of the debates that, we should be having about, various political issues. I think that it's something that is very much endemic to being on social media, very much endemic to sort of the kind of anonymity of social media that you see now.
Right.
I personally don't have a real issue here because frankly, I say what I want to say. If you don't like it, I don't really care. But I do feel like a somewhat of, for some writers, there's really a chilling effect. And I don't think I think it's broader than just sort of, I think it's often seen in terms of race, in terms of gender, but I see it sort of in a different kind of way. I mean, I remember writing something in the 2016 campaign about Bernie Sanders. And, I wrote a lot of things critical of Sanders and got a lot of attacks on social media for that. And I didn't really care. I mean, that's just part of the job when you're doing your opinion writer. But I remember I did a piece where I interviewed a bunch of reporters and I asked them, do you kind of hold your tongue a little bit on criticizing Sanders because you don't want to deal with the sort of social media backlash? And a lot of people said that they did.
Yeah.
And I remember this even going further back during the Snowden leaks to the NSA. I've talked to a lot of journalists who basically said, I think the story's being overstated. I think that there's more nuance to it, but I don't want to get into it because if I do, then I'm going to get attacked by those Snowden people, and I don't want to deal with that. And so I do think that there is, to me, I see it more as like certain sort of liberal orthodoxies that you can't disagree with, and if you do, you get criticized for it. Again, I don't personally worry about that. I have a pretty secure job, and my editors give me a lot of leeway. And if I'm pissing somebody off at the column, that's not to me a bad thing necessarily. I don't go out of my way to piss people off, but if I do, fine, that's part of the job. But I think for some writers, it is, especially for female writers, I think it's a rationale not to write certain things because you're going to get a backlash for it, and that backlash can often be kind of ugly. So I know that it often gets portrayed in terms of, race, in terms of gender and so forth, but I don't necessarily see it that way completely. But I do think that, people should be cognizant of the fact that all of this sort of backlash can have an effect. And I'll tell you, we talked about this before we got on this is about Barry Weiss, who
I wanted to ask you what I haven't really unpacked the story, but columnist Barry Weiss, New York Times, she resigned from New York Times and published her resignation letter, and it's trending on Twitter. It's a big story today. I don't really know what happened.
Look, it sounds like there's more to the story than she just resigned.
I mean, I'm seeing it being touted by Donald Trump Jr., Ted Cruz, Ben Shapiro, Brit Hume. Like the right is really celebrating.
They're defending her. And I still don't really know. So the thing with that story look, I'm not a huge fan of her writing, to be honest. And if I'm being truly, truly honest about this, I think that, she was hired to be an editor. In full disclosure, she edited a piece of mine that I did years ago for Tablet magazine, which actually did a very good job editing it. I didn't think she was really an effective opinion writer in the sense that, and this isn't, look, I mean, this is just opinions of everybody. I just felt that her stuff was a bit overwrought and a bit under-reported, under-researched. And in general, I just thought it wasn't a good fit for her. I mean, I think in a sense, the Times didn't do any favors by letting her be an opinion writer when she was clearly better as an editor.
That's a really fascinating analysis of it, because I think that I've never quite heard her work described that way, and I'm not super familiar. I haven't read everything she's written. She's actually been kind to me in the past, but yeah, overwrought and under researched, I think are good
really good specific criticisms.
Well, I mean, that's also something I think you can also say about Brett Stevens too, who I, by the way, don't hate as much as many progressives hate Brett Stevens. I don't love a lot of his pieces. I don't think he's that awful, but I do think sometimes, the worst thing you do as a pundit or opinion writer, I think, is to overstate your arguments and also not to do the research and not to do the work and not to base it on evidence. A pundit who sort of writes something without knowing if it's true, without, state something as fact without knowing it's fact, without doing the evidence, I think really undercuts themselves and undercuts, what the job is supposed to entail. But I think with her, the amount of vitriol that was directed at her was frankly disgusting. And I thought it was very gendered and frankly, often, borderline anti-Semitic because she's somebody who's been very supportive of Israel. I just think that I'm not a fan of her work. I think she had a lot of seasoning she could have used, frankly. But I think watching people today, gleeful that she resigned her job, made me kind of sick. And I think there's something gross about that. She's not an evil person. She just has ideas you don't agree with. And, the amount of people who really just, I think, went after her in a harsh way, it's not good. And I'll say this also, by the way, I feel the same way about Maggie Haberman, who, full disclosure, we're sort of friends. And she gets much more abuse than other Times reporters for allegedly, writing things nice about Donald Trump, which I think is driven a lot by gender as well. So I do think that has a lot to do with what's going on here. And I think that there is a pile-on effect in social media that can be really awful. And again, I say this is somebody who has over the years felt a pretty thick skin toward this. Yeah. I've dealt with it for a long time, but a lot of people do not have that thick of a skin when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think the point you made about social media is the most important point because I've asked you maybe 2 questions and you've talked for like 3 to 6 minutes each time. And I hung on your every word. Really interested in what you were saying. It was really,
okay.
It was really specific. It was nuanced. It was thoughtful. It was based on your experience as an opinion journalist and your career. And that's not what social media is. You said so many different things about her and her work and yours and your experience. You mentioned another example, and you have the credibility to talk about it. Whereas everybody just spouting off on Twitter, no matter who they are, yeah. and the groupthink that social media automatically creates and the effect that all of that has on our society, who knows? But this is why conversations like the one we're having are really where it's at, like a more thoughtful conversation. And I'm not just saying podcast. I'm saying this is how people should have discussions. What you just said, very specifically, at length, very thoughtfully, with credibility, versus a social media outrage party and just everybody getting an equal say and everybody weighing in and, piling on in hopes that they probably get new followers and respect and credibility. I'm done.
Well, but it's not, it's the social media pile-on I find just disturbing, and I think I remember the story.
Self-serving? Disturbing, you said. What'd you
disturbing. Yeah. It's also a lot of it's like virtue signaling too. I mean, I thought this thing about a couple of weeks ago in that woman, in the Central Park when she called the police on the birder who was a black man, and she recently was charged with a crime. And I thought what she did was gross, and I was sort of she deserved a lot of the criticism she got. But the pile-on effect, the efforts to get her fired for what she did, I just felt like there is an element. There's an ugliness to these kind of social media mobs, and I just think that I don't like to be a part of it. There's a pile-on. If it's a pile-on of a politician, I'm fine with that. That's comes to territory. When I have other pundits write opinion pieces I don't agree with, I try to avoid going off on them too much, or if I do, criticizing in a substantive way. I just think that we personalize these disagreements in a way that is really disturbing to me. The one thing I used to hate, and I do hate to this day about criticism, is like I used to write a lot of things negative of Bernie Sanders, and I'd often get a backlash, and that's fine. What would make me annoyed and angry, and I think I may have even lost some friendships over it, people would personalize disagreements. If you can't disagree with somebody if you disagree with somebody and you have to attack them personally, and call them names, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to engage in that conversation. And that's often, I feel like, what ends up happening on social media, what ends up happening in these kinds of conversations. And I just think on the thing with Bari Weiss, I feel like it was personal with her. People didn't like her. You know, she was a young woman. She had risen to a pretty prominent position. She gets on Bill Maher, gets on all these shows. She's got this, you know, book that she gets this like lavish, you know, book party. People are jealous. And I think that played a part of this too. And maybe she didn't deserve all the acclaim she got. I mean, I think it's a fair criticism. It's a fair point. But there was an ugliness to the attacks on her that I can't truck with. I don't like it. And I think a lot of people who are gleeful over the fact that she lost her job should ask themselves, like, is that really the stance you want to take at this point? I mean, is that really how you want to live your life and the kind of behavior you want to model? I don't think it should be.
What about, that's really well said and thoughtful, Michael. I'm glad that you brought it up. I thought we weren't going to talk about that much about Bari Weiss, but you said a lot there, and there's a lot to think about, and I'm sure people will want to think about it as they go through Twitter and scroll in everybody's reactions, as I was earlier about that. It's kind of nuts. So, but let's talk about where we're at right now with coronavirus, and it's spiking all over the country in the states that it's spiking in. I think everybody knows: Florida, Texas, Arizona, California is shutting back down. It looks like the whole country is going to have to shut back down again. Where do you see us going in the next couple of months with this lack of leadership or even lack of acknowledgement of the problem?
You know, I was writing something out of this today, actually, from my newsletter about this.
Truth and Consequences, which everybody can subscribe to and comes out on Thursdays and right into your email box. That one?
That's right. That one.
I love it.
Thank you. Truth and Consequences. You can sign up at the Globe, but also sign up at my on my Twitter profile. I just the word that comes to mind is helpless, which I don't often feel that way, but right now, you know, I feel helpless in the sense that you keep seeing these rising number of cases all over the country, and it's like, and it doesn't seem to be stopping. And you have a president who is completely, you know, just basically, you know, out to lunch when it comes to dealing with this issue, and a federal government that is out to lunch dealing with this issue, and governors who don't. I mean, Florida is the epicenter of this pandemic right now. They haven't mandated mask wearing. They haven't shut down the economy. They're still planning to open schools in the beginning of August. I mean, it's insane. It's fucking insane. Sorry if I can use that word. It's absolutely insane. And you look at this and you think, this cannot be happening in this country, that people can be this indifferent to mass death, to mass injury. I was talking to a guy lives on my block who had coronavirus, and he had it in March. So it's 4 months later, and he is still telling me that he is dealing with some of the health consequences from that. This is not like the flu where you get it and you are sick for 3 weeks and you get better and you're fine. There is like lifelong potential afflictions with this virus. It is a serious thing. And the lack of seriousness with how these public notices are taking this, it just makes me, it's so aggravating. You can see, I can barely even get the words out.
Yeah, no, I share it.
And I mean, in New York, thankfully, we have flattened the curve and we've done a lot of state things to deal with this. But, you know, kids aren't going back to school full time. You can't take. I was going to take my kids out to Utah for vacation. That's out the window. I mean, that's the least of the concerns we should have about coronavirus. But, you know, whatever. The point is, like, it's like, it feels like we've sacrificed so much the past 4 months. And for what?
Yes, exactly.
A lot of lives have been saved. That is a great thing. But people are still dying, still getting sick, and we're still not doing what we need to do to help people. And it makes me just angry but also deflated. At the same
time.
Of
lives have been saved, but you know, there's a question about the kind of the hope and the optimism of people, which can be crushed. There's also the question of the economy and how much has been lost by the fact that people just could not wait any longer to go back to Starbucks or whatever it is that they needed to get back to. And it's really, as you just said it so eloquently, it's sad, it's frustrating, and it's absolutely outraging that we couldn't be on the same page with this. But, you know, you said that this can't be happening in our country, but then you also wrote a pretty interesting column at the Boston Globe about how our
country is not exceptional. We're not doing well. You wrote using a lot of research and a lot of statistics about the problems that we have. And it's a great column, a sobering column for anybody who's not already kind of on that page. I mean, I wanted to add a few things, but talk to me about that column and what the point you're trying to make about what kind of country we've become.
Right. I mean, it's right. I mean, I wrote a book about a year ago on this topic, basically.
Yeah, there's that too. Yeah.
Yeah, that basically argued, the world is getting safer and it's getting healthier and people are out of poverty and they live longer, but we're going the opposite direction in this country. That was a year ago, talking about high obesity rates, infant mortality rates, what have you. And now, we are at this point where none of this should be a surprise, right? We can't deal with gun violence in this country. We can't stop the opiate epidemic. We can't, reverse the obesity rate, which is 40% in this country and was 32%, 10 years ago. We can't reverse anything. So why the hell anyone think we can deal with the coronavirus? I mean, I guess part of me thinks this is such a serious pandemic, a serious issue, that there would be some element of the country come together and realize we have to do something about this. But like everything else in America, it becomes polarized. It becomes a political issue, a cultural issue. And yeah, look, I said that a second ago, like I can't happen in America, but you're right. I shouldn't be surprised. This is who we are. We are an enfeebled nation that cannot deal with major political challenges. We just can't do it. We can't give healthcare to everybody. We can't give childcare to everybody. We can't give family leave to everybody. We can't, stop gun violence. We can't do any of these things. We've shown this over and over again. We used to be able to do it. We can't do it. It's funny. I was watching, you see The Martian, the Matt Damon movie?
Yeah, I like that movie.
A great movie.
Is it a great movie? Is it a great movie?
Love that movie.
I'll watch Matt Damon do anything. What that Zoo movie, I didn't see that one, but I should watch it because he's in it.
The one where they buy a zoo?
Well, yeah, I think his family his whole family bought a zoo. I think that might be the title of the movie, as a matter of fact. My family bought a zoo.
Bought a zoo, I think it's called. Yeah.
I read the backstory of that, and apparently Matt Damon's agent called him up and he's like, "Hey Matt, do you want to do this?" And he said yes. He just said He didn't even explain what the premise was. He said, "Yes, I'll do it." So that was at a point where he's doing anything. So about The Martian.
His best movie is the
Good Will Hunting. Don't be silly.
No, it's overrated. The Informant is a good movie.
Shut your fucking mouth about Good Will Hunting. Are you kidding me? It's over. It's over. Wow.
What's the part of Robin Williams where he's like, where he shows him the pictures of when he was like beaten up as a kid, and he's like, "It's not your fault."
Yeah. What's wrong with that?
Oh, come, really?
Too much?
Too much.
So listen, I'm a simpleton. I'm easy to please. That movie really got me, and so did Shawshank Redemption, and so did Dances with Wolves. So you can go fuck yourself.
Oh,
you can go fuck yourself. White saviors. White saviors.
Is literally the worst fucking movie ever. I hate that movie. Really?
Yeah. I struck up a friendship with Kevin Costner because of my love for that film.
All right, you know what? Let's move on from movies. Okay, clearly we're not going to agree on that. But let's go back to that. We should
clearly do a show separate about it, about how...
Definitely should.
I have no appreciation for good films, apparently. So in the movie The Martian, Matt Damon, what?
The Martian's all about, right. The movie, the thing is the guy, Matt Damon, he gets stuck on Mars, and they have to figure out how do they save this guy, bring him back to Earth. And it's all about saving this one guy. And it's all about, how do you overcome certain challenges? Problem solving, figuring out how to, get from point A to point B, and then when you do that, from point B to point C, and so on and so forth. I was thinking to myself, all of this effort to save one guy. We can't even save 100,000 people in this country. When it's so much easier to do. We have to go to fucking Mars to do it. Just put a fucking mask on, And I remember watching. I remember when I saw this movie. It was maybe 5-6 years ago when it came out. Thinking that's a great American can-do spirit movie.
Yeah.
Where's that spirit? I was also watching Apollo 13 a while back. Everyone working to save these three guys in a spaceship. Now we literally cannot save hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens from a pandemic that we can prevent, that other countries have figured out how to protect their own people from. It says something really bad about where we are as a country. And the fact also that right now, there's no hope of this thing getting under control anytime soon. None. Zero. That scares the hell out of me. As it should all of us, frankly.
Yeah, the thing that scares the hell out of me is that all the smart people I know are saying similar things about that.
Yeah.
And that's tough. That's tough.
It is.
because it's the question is, how does it end? And you can game it all out, but to me, there's no way, to know, because it's such an unpredictable thing, the virus and what we know about it. But the one thing that does seem to be an event that will happen, or maybe won't, is on November 3rd, there will be an election. And based on the outcome of that election is the future of the country's dealing with the pandemic. Forget about everything else, from climate to democracy. I mean, the pandemic... He'll have to. I mean, you could imagine he could be removed. I don't know. Not
going to be removed. We know that, right?
Sometimes I wake up because everything's so unpredictable. It seems like sometimes I just daydream that you're going to see Twitter like President Trump has resigned.
The dream, but then you're stuck with Pence, who's the empty suited.
He would handle this pandemic like a champion.
Yeah,
he would. I think he would. I think he'd
handle it better than Trump, but that's the lowest bar imaginable.
Yeah.
Look, I don't know how the country takes. I don't expect Trump to be reelected. I think he's going to lose. I think he's going to lose badly. But
if it's a free and fair election,
even if it's not, I just think at this point, I wrote about this today. Where
what if nobody goes to the polls because the pandemic is raging?
But they are, because people want Trump to lose.
I feel like you got a little bit. You hollered at me right there. I felt unsafe and I felt offended.
You feel endangered?
No, but unsafe and offended.
Okay.
Endangered is the same as unsafe. Yeah, you say they're going. No matter what, they're going? People were going to the polls no matter what?
I think so. Look what happened in Wisconsin in April. I mean, look at that. Yeah. I mean, people turned out in the midst of the pandemic to elect a Supreme Court justice. Mm-hmm. They're not going to do that for getting rid of Trump. Look, I think, can we take 6 more months of this? That's the thing that I find troubling. And, even if it's that Biden wins, it will be 6 months until a new president.
January 20th, yeah.
Yeah. But, it's funny about the election. I wrote something today about this. On my sort of theory on the race is that the trajectory of the race is very clear, which is that Trump's going to lose. Now, it doesn't mean that something couldn't change between now and then that would cause him to win, but it would be something that we're not aware of. In other words, what I mean is there's nothing in our current politics that makes me think he can change the trajectory. Maybe if if COVID-19 disappears tomorrow, or if there's some big Biden scandal, or if the vaccine is invented, next week, okay, maybe then. But I doubt none of those are going to happen. But the point being that, based on what we know now, I don't see any path to Trump getting reelected. I just don't see it. Now, I said that 4 years ago, I thought there's no chance Hillary was going to lose. So you don't have to trust me if you don't want to. But I would say I was wrong then. I'm not so sure that I'm wrong now.
I would wade through a river of COVID-19 to vote. And if the voting machine was made of COVID-19, I would still cast my vote on it.
I kind of feel the same way, actually. As an opinion writer, I try not to, even though I'm an opinion writer, I'm a journalist, I try not to say I'm going to vote for, say I'm going to support, but no one who could read me for the last 4 years wonders how I'm going to vote. And, at the end of the day, I don't think...
Marianne Williamson, write in.
That's right. I think that, at the end of the day, the country cannot take 4 more years of Trump. It can't. And I think...
It already hasn't, Michael. Why? At what point do we resign to the point like we can't take it anymore? The consequences. He just pardoned Roger Stone. That single act is the most blatant form of corruption that any single president of the United States of America has ever committed. That single act. Forget about everything else.
Well, I would say the Ukraine thing is maybe worse, but okay. Same president.
Yeah, you're right, and the other things like it, I suppose, that were
But I will say this, and this is the thing I don't like to get.
My point about that is that what are we? Are we a democracy? Are we an autocracy? What have we already lost? Is what I'm trying to accommodate for when you say we can't take 4 more years. Yeah, but what have we already lost? What do we have to gain back for the next 10, 20 years of the rest of our lives, generation, if there is...
I'll say something highly controversial here, which is that...
Right here on Stand Up with Pete Tomley.
In a weird way, if Biden wins, Democrats take back the Senate, you could see like a true ushering in of a truly progressive era in American politics, more progressive than certainly since the Great Society, and that will be because of Trump. So that's the thing that I find kind of surprising is that the backlash to Trump could produce the kind of progressive future that we need. Now, it doesn't make up for the fact we've wasted 4 years, and doesn't make up for the fact that how much damage has been done and lives have been lost needlessly.
It's an interesting way of looking at it because, if Hillary had won, there would have been more of the same with the Republicans and the way they treated her. And she wasn't going
to lost re-election, and there'd be midterms. They're supposed to pick up seats. We're not in that place now.
And all those Clinton conspiracy theories, how good they would have gotten.
Sure.
Yeah, well, listen, I'll let you go because we've been talking for so long, only on the record, though, for like 30 minutes. But
I was going to say another thing, but just so I'm clear on this point, like to say that, I support, defeating Trump is not a partisan argument. I know it will be seen as such, but it really isn't. I mean, I just think that there are certain things, and there's a line that I used to hear as a speechwriter. You say some issues are above politics. When anyone ever says that, they're saying the exact opposite. They're saying, actually, this is about politics. And I'm saying that if you make it about politics, you're the one being partisan. But me saying it's not about politics is not being partisan, even though it is. But this is not about politics, not about partisanship. Trump's damage to the country that he has done is so extreme and so obvious, right? And so odious that I don't think it's partisan to recognize that and to say, we cannot take 4 more years of this. I really don't. And I think as journalists, look, I get the objective that the news reporters can't say this, but opinion writers should say it because it's true. And, we need to seek unpleasant truths, and the country cannot take 4 more years. We will not survive as democracy if he's reelected, period.
Are we still a democracy now?
Ish. I mean, no. No, we're not, because last time I checked, Donald Trump got 3 million fewer votes than his opponent and still became president.
I was going to suggest democracy-ish as the title for your next book, or at least column, but then you disagree with it in the end.
Can pardon a political crony who was convicted of lying to protect him. It's not a democracy.
New York City in the background.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
Brooklyn, to be specific. Michael Cohen at SpeechBoy71. Follow him right now. Read him at the Boston Globe and go to his Twitter account and subscribe to his newsletter, which I have for years. I love reading everything he writes. I love talking to him no matter what. And we made plans. We're going to hang out. You're going to come up, bring the kids up to the pool.
I will bring
them a nice round above ground. Doing very well. Podcast is doing very well.
Raking in the bucks, right? Aren't we all?
Going all right, actually. It's a pretty it's an interesting thing, to talk about at some point about how media has changed and how, especially right now, you just want a source and people you can trust. And it doesn't matter if it's Michael Cohen at the Boston Globe or, somebody at the Washington Post or Pete Dominic's podcast. Like you want to, and I think what's different about the podcast media and what's obviously different about me is like there's a connection where I share pretty much everything of myself in addition to these great conversations and my thoughts on it. And people then relate to that and they feel connected. And I feel so connected to them. I talk to so many listeners all week off air.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, really thoughtful people, always engage in conversations. A lot of them really carried me through the hardest patch and have been rooting for me. And it's a community where we bring, really smart people like you into and get to talk to you and have conversations. And that's what this is. And it's worth paying for because and it's interesting how that's even able to be done technically, much less that people would, I don't know. That's how I'm describing it.
But look, I agree. And I think, it's funny because one of the things that we're working for the Globe is you're preaching to the choir, and which isn't, it's a little tricky when you're opinion writer. You want to say things that are provocative, but you also, have readers who kind of rely on what they want to hear.
You're doing that with podcasting. Most podcasts probably are too, though. I mean, I
think a lot of media now. Yeah. But I think at this moment, I don't know that that's a bad thing. I think we need a little reassurance because
yeah. I need reassurance that I'm not the crazy one a lot of times. And Wayfair selling kids. Wait, are they?
Like, am I gonna we're all on the same, like, we're all still in reality, right? Like, who's in reality with me? Who's in my reality, at least?
But but that's the thing. I may need that, but I think people who listen to us and read us, they also need that.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
That I'm not crazy, right?
Yes.
That, like, the way I feel as far as feeling helpless is it gives it certain affirmation.
Yep.
It's not kind of why I do what I do, but I also understand why it's important at this point.
It is why I do what I do.
Okay,
I don't even know what I just said.
By the way, right now, I can say it's dark, and you are. I can only see like your face and your yellow T-shirt, and there you go. This would make for like a phenomenal. Now I can see myself through your iPhone, which is really creepy.
Oh wow!
This would make for the best horror movie ever. I think opening right there. It would be perfect. Actually,
let me just make sure I can screen grab this and share it as part of the podcast. You are
you're part of it. Like, I'm not going to lie, you're kind of creeping me out a little bit. I'm not going to lie.
Well,
and yet, at the same time, I feel intrigued. It's weird.
Well, because that's my head. You just described my head, creepy but intriguing. Yeah, no, I mean, that is, like, I'm not being self-deprecating. That is, I'm objectively, that's what I look like right now. Creepy, but yet,
But yeah, you know what? I'm kind of curious.
I'll share the image.
Curious.
I'm sharing the image, but only for Patreon, only for subscribers. Only subscribers are going to get to see.
No question about it. Definitely. You got to pay extra for that.
You got to pay extra for this shot. Yeah. All right, buddy. So good talking to you, man. Thank you very much, as always.
Always a pleasure, man. That was great.
It was great. I enjoyed that. Enjoyed it a lot. I think he's going to come up next weekend with the kids, with his daughters, hang out at the big pool, the big above ground pool. Looking forward to that. Hopefully we can make it work. Okay, and if you want to see that creepy picture of me, you have to subscribe. I mean, if that doesn't move subscriptions, I am not sure what will, but check it out. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic. If you haven't signed up for a paid subscription yet, now is the time. My final guest of the show comes from a paid subscriber, my friend Derek Stafer, who lives out in Iowa. He's lost his mother and his sister down the conspiracy rabbit holes, and doesn't look like they're going to be coming back anytime soon. He told me about this podcast, QAnon Anonymous. I looked into it. I listened to it. It's really very entertaining and informative at the same time. That's how I like it. And Travis View is one of the three co-hosts on the podcast. I had a conversation with him once before because Derek suggested him to me, and so I reached out to him and got him back on the podcast. Here's my conversation with Travis View right now. You should listen to his podcast. You should follow him on Twitter. You can find all those links in the show notes to this podcast. Here it is. All right, I've got Travis View now. He's a huge hit. First time I should say, he was on the podcast, and his podcast is awesome. I highly recommend it, as I was just saying. Travis View, thank you very much for joining me again, pal.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
Lots to talk with you about, but specifically, I wanted to start with whether or not I can buy a child on Wayfair.com, which is one of the most popular online retailers in the country, maybe the world. Like, it's like Walmart and Wayfair and Target maybe, but this is a big, big company in case people don't know it. And the big conspiracy theory this week is that their overpriced items, very overpriced, I'll say, are actually kids that you can buy. Help me unpack this.
Yeah. So what happened is that some conspiracy theorists, they noticed that some items on Wayfair, specifically some cabinets, were suspiciously high priced. They were sometimes, $10,000, $13,000, absurdly high priced. And they also had sometimes unusual names, actually names of girls and stuff. It was like a feminine names, and they suspected that Wayfair was actually being used as an open marketplace to traffic children. Now, there's nothing to substantiate this. In fact, often the specific sort of missing girls that they thought were being trafficked through these cabinets actually spoke out. They took to social media and they said, "I'm not missing. You guys are crazy. There's nothing to this." There's actually two incidents where that happened. And Wayfair, for their part, they claimed that the cabinets were some kind of industrial cabinets that weren't designed for home use, and they weighed like 1,200 pounds, and this is why they had an absurd price point. But despite the absurdity of the claims, they spread very far. There are lots of people who bought into the idea that they had uncovered a secret sort of child trafficking operation that was being conducted through Wayfair.
How often would you say that people find things, these people, I guess, that are unexplainable? Like this. This is hard to explain. It wasn't just those cabinets. It was like a shower curtain or pillowcases that were for like thousands of dollars or something like that. Those things, you can't understand why that is. You can't explain something. When I see something, Travis, online or in life that I can't explain, I don't jump to the conclusion that they're trafficking children. This is what it seems like, at least that's my interpretation, that you can't explain this thing. They must be trafficking children. There is this obsession with pedophile rings and child trafficking with a lot of these conspiracy theorists, and I really struggle as to what that's all about.
I mean, I think that for like a conspiracy theorist, it's it's useful for a couple reasons. Number one, real life human trafficking, not the kind that conspiracy theorists are obsessed with, but like the real kind, is done in secret in class, and sometimes it involves the dark web and stuff, and sometimes it's very difficult to uncover, and sometimes it requires either really thorough investigative journalism or a dedicated law enforcement team to actually uncover these sorts of activities. And so they're obsessed with the idea that that they too can sort of like uncover these kinds of nefarious activities just by browsing an e-commerce site and taking screenshots. And there's that element. And also, I mean, this is just sort of a classic tactic. I mean, there's really nothing worse you can accuse someone of than abusing children. It's obviously a horrendous crime, and they just want to be able to believe that the people they don't like, especially sometimes celebrities or elite politicians or sometimes people in the news media, are guilty of these really, really horrendous things because they think it'll be sort of the ultimate takedown.
Yeah, but it's still so hard to understand why normal thinking people would jump to that conclusion that because something's unexplainable, it must be trafficking in kids. And then also, I mean, you guys have talked about this a lot. You have these theories like Pizzagate, and that there's an actual establishment in Washington D.C. that has a child trafficking ring operating out of it. And then you realize when this guy went there and shot it up that wasn't the case. But it doesn't change their view, right? Like once something is disproven or debunked, it doesn't mean that they think differently. I mean, this is a psychological behavior that has a name for it. I think it's cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, absolutely. For example, when the young women who came out, they took to social media, they spoke out using Facebook Live and TikTok to say, "I'm not missing," and quit bothering me, quit hitting up my family and saying that I'm missing. This is absurd. A lot of conspiracy theorists, they simply continued to believe that they were in the right. They thought that that these people were actually actors, or they're being set up, or there was some sort of deep fake, or there's some other explanation besides the fact that they were simply misled and they had the wrong idea about why these particular cabinets had such exorbitant prices. I mean, they just can't handle the idea that they were wholly on the wrong track, and they'll use any sort of a rationalization to maintain their absurd beliefs.
So I've been tracking these kind of conspiracy theories for years, not the way that you have. I don't understand them the way that you do, which is why I'm talking to you. And when I say tracking, Travis, I mean nothing technically, not using any tools, and I shouldn't even be using the word tracking. But what it seems to me is that they are on the upswing, that they are growing, that they are spreading, not being minimized. And that's because probably we can talk about why, but the internet overwhelmingly is the main reason, social media, and that's how things spread. But do you have any way, and what are your thoughts on whether or not these conspiracy theories, specifically the QAnon theories, are becoming more popular or spreading or not?
Yeah, they are definitely spreading sort of outside the sort of the typical circles where you see deranged conspiracy theories. I'm thinking about like shitlords on the Chans or the far right who usually spread these conspiracy theories. But it has burst out of that kind of circle, and now we have people like Instagram influencers who started promoting QAnon conspiracy theories. The Wayfair conspiracy theory was popular with a few of them on Instagram. Now we have sort of TikTok teens, people who are literal teenagers who are spreading these Wayfair conspiracy theories and think that there's some kind of substance to them, and they do screenshots and they trade theories. On
my
TikTok.
15-year-old said that's where she heard about the Wayfair thing, and I said, when you saw that, to my 15-year-old, I go, when you saw that, what did you think? And she's like, I was just like, what the fuck? What is that? I was like, good. You didn't like read much into it. No, I thought it was crazy, but yeah, every new app, every social media has these theories. So wherever these kinds of things can spread, they are spreading. That's what you're saying.
Definitely. And yeah, it's also it's spreading to people who you might otherwise think would not buy into these conspiracy theories. It's not just trolls on 4chan anymore. It's like it's young people, and it's not just evangelical white Christians anymore. It's quite a sort of diverse set of people who are spreading these deranged conspiracy theories. It has definitely become more popular in the last few months, almost certainly in due part to the pandemic. The pandemic has made people less certain about the sort of the state of the world. It's added to people's stress. It's made people feel more insecure about the future will bring. And when those sorts of things happen, they seek out a little more conspiratorial answers to the world that we're living in.
That's a really good point, that these theories are spreading rapidly and more with more intensity because of the pandemic, and the theory itself that the virus is created in a lab and spread on purpose is one of the most I'm guessing popular theories. Is that right?
Yeah, it's hugely popular. Despite the fact that you can. There are lots of research papers that go dive into the genome. We have split it open as far as it can go, and this particular virus did evolve in nature. But the delusional belief that it was engineered in a laboratory has just not been substantiated. But despite that, it still persists in conspiratorial circles.
So you guys had an awesome episode recently of your podcast, QAnon Anonymous, which everybody should listen to. And you went deep on how many people that are running for Congress. There are congressional candidates that are QAnon conspiracy theorists. And do you find it, by the way, hard to classify and label them because they believe a different set of beliefs? Some, are crazier, deeper into it than others. And how do you classify and quantify someone being a QAnon conspiracy theorist that's running for Congress? Tell me a little bit about what you learned about that episode and specifically how you can categorize them.
So this is we do know that there are over 60 congressional candidates, current and former, who have promoted QAnon, brushed up against QAnon in some way, and now we have I think the current number is 11 of those QAnon congressional candidates who are going to be on the ballot in November. And these numbers we got from basically Alex Kaplan over at Media Matters, who's been doing an excellent job tracking these candidates. And we even have one candidate in particular. Her name is Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she's running in Georgia's 14th district. And she was a QAnon promoter from 2017 through 2018, and she's actually the favored candidate to win in that election. So, starting next year, we'll almost certainly have a QAnon promoting Congress member. And this is it is surprising and delusional. But you make a good point. We're talking about how some of the QAnon congressional candidates, they believe it more fervently than others. One candidate in particular who kind of shrank away from QAnon. Her name is Lauren Boebert, and she's in Colorado. And she appeared on a couple QAnon platforms. She appeared on a YouTube show called Patriot Soapbox. She also appeared on another QAnon show called Steel Truth with Ann Vandersteel, who was a QAnon follower. And when she was asked about QAnon on Steel Truth, she said that she hopes it's true, but she also mentioned that she thought it was a little fringe. And then after she won her primary in an upset victory against the incumbent, who was favored to win, who was even endorsed by the president, she actually wound up denying that she had any association with QAnon. She said she wasn't a follower. She even said that QAnon equals fake news. And this is sort of an interesting sort of response because it sort of signals that even if you are perhaps a Republican candidate who doesn't believe in QAnon, it means that the QAnon community is a constituency, is a sort of voter base that you can appeal to and wink to in order to gin up support for yourself.
Right. You guys were describing that interview that she did with this QAnon host, whatever platform she's on, and when she started to separate herself from the theories that or denounce them, criticize them, the host looked at her I'm listening to your podcast and it really made me want to watch that interview. So good job or bad job making me want to watch that interview. I'm not sure.
Yeah, not the result we were hoping for, I guess. But in that particular case, it feels like someone like Boebert, it feels like she's trying to walk a tightrope between this deranged sort of QAnon world and sort of maintain support for them, but also people who are a little bit more grounded and think that these conspiracy theories are deranged and not helpful. She needs to appeal to those people too. And so she's trying to find a way to balance these two camps.
So what about the kind of telltale signs or signals? You guys also were talking about Michael Flynn's video, which I watched. He on, 4th of July, he and his family members, they all took the oath. But I think it was an oath to the Constitution of the United States of America. But then at the end, they tagged it with QAnon language. Do I have it right?
Yeah, what happened was that basically on 8kun, some Anon posted the oath of the digital soldier. And this is basically the same oath that any commissioned officer takes before they assume their office. But with added, where we go one, we go one, where we go all, we go one at the end. And then Q instructed.
And by the way, just real quick, that's where we go one, we go all. A lot of listeners, folks listening, may have seen with the acronym WW1, whatever it is, that a lot of people use on social media. If you see that's QAnon, right? Sorry to interrupt you, but that's...
Yes, that is 100% a QAnon's slogan, though it originates from the 1996 film White Squall, but it is definitely a 100% a QAnon phrase.
No way. Really?
Yeah, way. Really.
Oh, my gosh. I think I watched that. I think that was a good movie. Okay, anyway... So there's no doubt then, I think it's fair to say that the QAnon theories are spreading. You designated as to why. And so how much is, the president trafficking and signaling and spreading these theories himself and anything he might be saying or sharing on Twitter or social media?
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is that Trump has, quote tweeted or retweeted, QAnon accounts. I think over 160 times is the most recent count. It keeps doing it. But the funny thing is that at the same time, just today it was announced that that Trump rehired Sebastian Gorka to come back to work for a position.
I just saw that.
And the funny thing is that Gorka is fervently anti-QAnon. There are a handful of these people who are very pro-Trump, but extremely anti-QAnon. Gorka has repeatedly said that QAnon is garbage. And so he's bringing this person on board, too. I mean, really, that just signals to me that, Trump is just for anyone who's for him, and it's like Gorka's for him and anti-Q. These QAnon people are for him, so he's for them, too. That's the only thing that matters. But as a consequence of his desire to sort of encourage anyone who promotes him or sees him as great, he's been promoting these QAnon people, too, for the past few years.
I want to go back to one thing that you said earlier about the type of people that are believing in these conspiracy theories are kind of changing as well. When I hear people reach out to me and say, my friend Mark is visiting his in-laws in Michigan, and he's like, my brother-in-law thinks that, the Wayfair thing is real and you can order kids online. My first reaction to Travis usually is, well, does he have a job? Is he educated? And I don't mean to be demeaning. I don't mean to be critical or discriminate against someone's intelligence or something, but I'm just curious as to, honestly, if you have a job and a reputation at that job, as a company or as a lawyer, or a teacher, or whatever, and people, and you're espousing these beliefs, I hope you're minimizing yourself to some extent. You're flying a freak flag that's not welcome at the firm or in a decent, stable community. And in our community where I live, we have this family that buys into this shit and is spreading it. And people are minimizing that family. And it's really sad because our friends are friends with that kid. But we can't allow our kids to go over to their house. They don't believe in COVID-19 and wearing masks and disinfectant and so on. And so my working theory is we still live in a country, in a society where if you're outspoken that you believe these really wild, crazy things, it's going to damage you at work, in your community, in your family. And I'm wondering if you think there's truth to that, and if people with good educations, and good jobs are buying into this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like there was one case in Australia. There was a psychiatrist named Dr. Russell McGregor, and he actually wound up for a long time blogging about QAnon on his practice's website. So here's a guy with an established practice treating patients, and he has fallen down the rabbit hole, and he's he's educated, obviously, but that doesn't prevent him from believing these deranged things. He wound up actually being struck from the medical register, so he can no longer practice medicine as a consequence of his QAnon belief. Despite that, he still promotes QAnon on Twitter right now, today. I mean, it's one of those things where it does have social consequences. It does have consequences to society at large if you are a COVID-19 denier. And but despite all that, these people, they believe it wholeheartedly, because honestly, it's not about the belief. What it gives people is the sense of purpose and the sense of community that maybe they're not getting elsewhere.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do with my podcast, create a sense of purpose and a community for people that's an alternative to buying into those crazy beliefs and having to be in that community. So thank you for being my guest today, pal. You guys have a great podcast, and I hope that you keep doing it forever, because you're uncovering such important issues and talking about them and explaining them. And it's really entertaining. You guys are hilarious and smart, and I highly recommend it. Travis View, thank you for joining me again. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks again for inviting me.
All right, check them out on Twitter at Travis_View, and more importantly, listen to their podcast, QAnon Anonymous. Find it wherever you listen to your podcasts. And that is all I've got for this podcast, this episode today, 144 in the can. Wow. Every day we're doing this together. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for your suggestions. Thank you for your connections. Thank you for making me feel like I'm not alone, like I'm not just talking in this microphone all alone. Yesterday, I got a whole bunch of messages from listeners saying, again, that they're happy I'm back after a week off and that the conversations have been really great. And I got a lot more where that came from the rest of the week. Excited about my guest joining me this week. I've got Jared Sexton joining me for the first time. I'm super pumped about that. I'm going to talk teachers with my friend Andrew Spard down in Florida. Ali Velshi is scheduled to join me as well. Who would you like to hear on this podcast? Let me know. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and sign up for that paid subscription right now at the paid subscription link in the show notes to the podcast, or go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic. And remember, you aren't alone. I'm right here with you. Reach out. I'd love to talk to you and connect. I love you. You guys say you love me, and I feel it. Thank you. I'll talk to you tomorrow.